This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good evening everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Parshas Seitzei. Actually, we have a really fantastic subject tonight. It's based on something we may have mentioned in the past, but it will really open up for us a whole new subject that I don't believe we've ever seen before. The pasuk says in Parshas Seitzei, "V'chiyah be'ish chet." If somebody has a sin, mishpat maves, with a capital judgment, v'humas, and he will die, and he will be killed. In other words, somebody has a sin, and he's liable to capital punishment, v'humas, and they kill him. Now we know the halacha is that kol haniskalim nislin, anyone who gets skila, they hang him afterwards. The salisa isayaletz, and they hang him on a tree. So the Torah says, don't let his body remain hanging overnight. You got to bury him on that day. It is the disgrace of God that is hanging. Rashi explains that a person was created b'tselem elokim. Our physical features resemble that of God. So if somebody sees that a person is hanging, they'll think, Chas v'shalom, the Rebbeinu Shalom is in that matzav. Because we look so similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rashi gives the mashal, if the king has a twin brother who's a criminal, so if they're going to hang him, they have to let the body down overnight, otherwise people are going to think the king is hanging. Do not defile your land, that Hashem your God gives you as an inheritance. Okay, that's the simple meaning of the pasuk. However,
they kill a guy during the day, in the morning, and he's hanging there
the whole day. They can't leave him overnight.
But that itself is a bizarre.
Look, a minimal amount of time we let him hang, but he can't hang for the entire night. That's the simple meaning of the pasuk. However, in the Sefer Chavos Yair, now the Chavos Yair, not to be confused with Rabbi Yair Bachrach, but this is the Chavos Yair by Rabbi Elazar Kalir, not to be confused with Rabbi Eliezer HaKalir, the Paitan. This is an Achroin who lived at the end of the 18th century. He gave a Hesped. Now this Rav, Rabbi Elazar Kalir, was a Rav in Zavludav and Rechnitz and Kalin, and he composed the Sefer Or Chadash Ala Torah and the 5 Megillos and Masechta Psachim and Masechta Kiddushin. And he gave the following, he delivered the following words, and he recounted a Hesped that was given by none other than Rav Moshe Isserles. Who's Rav Moshe Isserles? The Ramak. Who did he give the Hesped for? None other than his illustrious father-in-law, Rav Shalom Shachna. Now Rav Shalom Shachna is a name that may not be as familiar as Ramak, but Rav Shalom Shachna was the greatest authority in all of Europe in the 16th century. The Ramak writes about him in Siman Memhei, Goilas HaKoiseres, Ateres, Teferes, Gachales, Hanesheres, Ner Yisrael, and his Rebbe was Rabbi Yaakov Palak, who introduced a new method of Talmudic study called Pilpul, which is really impossible to explain because we have nothing to compare it to, but it was some kind of intellectual gymnastics, and they would use complicated, convoluted analytics to try to train the mind of the Talmidim, and this was a very big discussion whether this is a proper way to learn. The Maral was vehemently opposed to it, many Gedolim were opposed to it, but Rabbi Yaakov Palak, who was the Gadol Hadar, he introduced the system. It was followed by his student Rav Shalom Shachna. Rav Shalom Shachna had many great Talmidim, including the Ramah, who became his son-in-law, including Rav David Gans. Okay.
So how did they learn before? Just playing Gemara and Rashi and Tosfos and...
They would learn more straightforward. And Rav Shalom Shachna...
I think we should bring it back.
The straightforward or the gymnastics? So, now, in the Sefer Sheres Yisrael, he brings that if you looked in the Ramah's Gemara on Sanhedrin, the Avtzadik Ches, where it talks about the name of Mashiach, the Ramah in his handwriting wrote, I say the name of Mashiach is Shachna, my father-in-law, like the pasuk says, L'shichnoi Sidrashenu. So this is the esteem that the Rav Shalom Shachna was held, and like his Rebbe, Rav Shalom Shachna did not write down any of his psakim, and on his matzeva of Rav Shalom Shachna it says that He was Marbitz Torah for 40 years without being paid, and which is a great feat. Okay, basically he had thousands of Talmidim, ad kedei kach that anybody in Europe was a student of Rav Shalom Shachna. In any event, the Ramah in Lublin. He was a Rav in Lublin. He was a Rav in Lublin. Now, the Ramah said the following Hesped on Rav Shalom Shachna. V'chiyah be'ish. If a man will have chet. Now the word chet means missing. Like when David was approached by Bathsheba, and Bathsheba says, David, when you die, me and Shlomo will be chatoim, missing. We'll be missing gedula. Chet means a missing, a chisaron. That's what the word chet means. In fact, there's another proof. Kaileya el asara, v'layechta. What does it say in the Nevi'im? He could shoot to a hair's breadth and not miss. Chet means missing. So the Ramah said as follows. If a man will have chet, he'll be missing mishpat maves, a reason to die. Why would somebody be missing a reason to die? Because they're a tzaddik. They never sinned. So instead of translating if a man will have a sin, they translated it chet mishpat maves. They will be missing a reason to die. This is what the Ramah said about his illustrious father-in-law. He'll be missing a reason to die. V'humas, and the guy dies. In other words, you see, Nebuch, there's somebody who is dying, and he doesn't have a reason to die. He never committed a sin. Why did he die? V'salisa oisayal eitz. Hinge it, blame it on the primordial sin of Adam HaRishon. That when Adam ate from that fruit, the verdict of mankind is man always has to die. Whether somebody sins or somebody doesn't sin, man always has to die. Like the Gemara says in Baba Basra, Arba mesu be'etyoy shel nachash. 4 people died because of the bite of the snake. What does that mean? Which 4 people? Binyamin, son of Yaakov, Amram, father of Moshe, Yishai, father of David, Kilav, son of David. So even if someone never sins, one would end up dying because of the original sin of Adam HaRishon. So this is what the Ramah said about his illustrious Shver. That he said his Shver never sinned, and he has no reason to die. So why did my Shver die? If a man has chet, he's lacking, he's missing, mishpat maves, a judgment of death, v'humas, and yet he dies. How can we wrap our mind around it? How can we wrap our head around it? V'solisa oisay aleitz, blame it on the tree, blame it on the sin of the Yetz Hadas, which is an incredible way to read the pasuk. Simply put, if somebody committed a sin and their judgment is death, hang him on a tree. No, the Ramah said on Rav Shalom Shachna, if a man will be missing a reason to die and he dies anyway, blame it on the sin of the Yetz Hadas. So, I came across a sefer this week called B'Chagvei Hasela by Rav Chagai Fershal. And he brings at the end of the sefer an article that his father wrote. Now I don't know who he is. You know who he is? Yeah? Who is he? Yeah. He was your Rabbi in Israel? Wow. Okay. There you go. So who's his father? So he brings an article that his father wrote.
What's his name again?
Am I pronouncing it correctly? What's his name? Freschel? There you go. Okay. That's what it says.
Where does it say? Which line?
Number 3, B'Chagvei Hasela, Dvarim, Reb Chagai Freschel. Okay. So, contemporary, I figured. And he brings from his father that Reb Eliezer Kalir, again an Achroin, not to be confused with the Paitan, gave a Hesped in 1785. Reb Eliezer Kalir himself gave a Hesped in 1785, and he said over a Hesped that the Ramah gave on Rav Shalom Shachna, and this is very suspicious. Why is it suspicious? Because when did Rav Shalom Shachna pass away? He passed away in 1558. When did the Ar Chadash live? When did he give this Hesped? In 1785. That means for 230 years, nobody knew that the Ramah gave this Hesped on Rav Shalom Shachna. We have no evidence for 230 years. From the time Rav Shalom Shachna died, until the Ar Chadash, in his Sefer Chavos Yair, the Ar Yakar, or the Ar Chadash, he wrote all three Svarim, wrote a Hesped that he gave based on the Hesped that the Ramah said for Rav Shalom Shachna. So it is somewhat curious that a period of 230 years passed, and we have no information that the Ramah said this about Rav Shalom Shachna until the year 1785. Fine. So Reb Preschel continues. We have another evidence that the Ramah gave this Hesped, also in somewhat of a rare sefer called Yarach HaEsanim, Esan HaEzrachi, from Rabbi Avram Rappaport. And he has another very important diuk in this pasuk. Because the pasuk says, V'chiyah be'ish Chet mishpat maves. Simply it means if a person will have a judgment of death. But what does chet mean? Where does chet come into this pasuk? If it just means a person was sentenced to death, it should say v'chiyah b'ish mishpat maves. If somebody has a sentence of death, what does it mean? Chet mishpat, a sin of a sentence to death. The word chet is extra. And what does it mean v'humas? Obviously, if he has a chet mishpat maves, he's going to be killed. So he quotes a pshat that the Ramah said. Now, interestingly, he does not say that the Ramah gave this pshat as a hesped on his father-in-law. He just quotes, this is the pshat of the Ramah, that chet could mean a little different than the Chavos Yair says that chet means missing. Chet could also mean purity. Now, how does chet mean purity? Like what? Exactly. Or v'chiteas habayis, so purify the house. So he reads, the Ramah read the pasuk like this: V'chiyah ve'ish, if man will have chet, he's pure of mishpat maves, of a reason to die. If a man will be pure of a reason to die, v'humas, and yet he dies. Here you have a guy, he's a tzaddik yisod olam, he has no reason to die, he has no reason for something bad to happen to him. He's pure of a reason to die. V'humas, and yet he dies. Why did he die? V'salisa isayaleit, hinge it on the sin of the Yetzadas. It's a moiradik pshat. If somebody dies, you see somebody, a righteous person that passes on and they have no reason to die, at the end of the day, everyone has to go because of the sin of the Eitz Hadas. This is what was said over by Rabbi Avram Rappaport in the Sefer Yarach HaEsanim.
This is what the Ramah said?
No, just that the Ramah offered this pshat. However, not that the Ramah said it at the Hesped of Rav Shalom Shachna. That he doesn't say. Now, the Sefer Yarach HaEsanim was published in Taf Kuf Nun Vav, 1796. Also a little curious that for 240 years we have no record that the Ramah said this. Now, here we come to the whopper. Because I've known this pshat for a very long time. I remember I once heard from Rabbi Obam. I must have said it over many times. I'm sure if you've been hearing the Shiurim, you've heard this before. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. So I'm working on an English sefer on Tu B'Shvat. It's almost ready, any day. And I just quoted this Yaros Devash. So Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz writes in the Yaros Devash that not that the Ramah gave a hesped for Rav Shalom Shachna, even more incredible, that at the Levaya of the Ramak, who's the Ramak? Moshe Cordovero. It was just his yard site. And he's the author of the Torah Devorah. The Ramak was nifter in 1570. So the Rav Shalom Shachna was nifter in 1558. The Ramak was nifter in 1570. And at his Levaya, who attended his Levaya? None other than the Arizal. And who was maspid at the Levaya? None other than the Arizal. And what did the Arizal say at the Levaya of the Ramak? We don't know. Who tells us? Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. What does Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz say? Number 6. The Ari was doirish at the Ramak's Levaya. Ki yiyah be'eshchet mishmar maves. If a man will be missing a reason to die. Chet, a lashon of missing. And vihumas, and he died. V'talisa isayalitz, you should hang it on the sin of the Eitz Hadas. So still, it's very suspicious. Because the Ramak was nifter in 1570, and Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, as we're about to see, was the Rav in
Much later.
Ehu, very good, Altona, Hamburg, Wandsbek, in 1750. So we're talking about 180 years, with nobody ever saying a word that the Arizal said this about the Ramak. Now that would be huge. You would think that the Arizal's Hesped for the Ramak was probably like the most all-time famous Hesped. And yet the first record of this is Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz in about the years 1750. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz got to Ehu. We have over here number 7 in the second paragraph in the end of the year Tav Kuf Yud. That's 1750. And he was Nifter in Elul, 1764. So this Hesped was given sometime between 1751 and 1764, a good 180 years after the Arizal said the Hesped. So now I was remembering...
doesn't say where he got this from?
No, he took it for granted that this is a Davar Yadua. Now I was remembering yesterday that I thought I saw this somewhere else, and sure enough, the Chidah brings down in this week's Parsha, number 8. Now, when did the Chidah live? I didn't realize the Chidah was pretty late. Chidah was 1724 to 1806. The Chidah brings down in the Nachal Kidumim in this week's Parsha, V'chiyah be'ish chet, if a man will have a sin, mishpat maves, and a judgment of death. So he darshans. He says, by the way, the Arizal said at the Hesped of the Ramak, somebody's missing a reason to die because he's a tzaddik gomor and he has no chisaron to be chayiv misa. Why? Now, where did the Chidah get it from? And this was amazing to me, because we did once point out that the Chidah in the Shem HaGedolim, where he lists all the Gedolim who lived before him. You have one? You guys have a Shem HaGedolim? Next time you go to a Sarim store, you got to buy yourselves a Shem HaGedolim. They just came out with a brand new one with like all kinds of footnotes. Yeah. Rabbi Feiner told me he just got it. I spoke to him yesterday. Yeah. Shem HaGedolim. What?
I was next door yesterday. I was next door to...
So... Yeah. We can get...
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Title the Eitz Hadas on somebody that has no sin when Eitz Hadas is all about sin.
No, here's you have a guy, the guy, Yankel, Beryl, never committed a sin, and yet he died. Why did he die? It's because
Because of the Eitz Hadas?
Because of the Eitz Hadas, because mankind has a zuhama in them, and the only way to get it out is to go into the earth, and the Eitz
Hadas is representation of sin.
Avada, it's a sin, but the person who died never sinned. It's because his ancestor, Adam, he ate...
How could you be toilet on something that has to do with sin?
It's enough.
How could you be toilet?
No, that's the point.
That's perfect on somebody that's only sinning.
The answer, because he is a descendant, so he has no choice but to pay the price for what Adam Rishon did. So now, we once mentioned that there is a Gadol, one of a number of Gedolim, who the Chidah does not list in the Shem HaGedolim. He does not list Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. Apparently he did not want to get involved in that machlokes and that. But the Chidah in the Sefer Dvarim Achadim, which is a Sefer of his drashos, says this pshat that if you see someone who dies and he doesn't have a reason to die, hinge it on. That's what it looks like. You put on your special glasses, your sin-looking glasses. You go there's a special store on Central Avenue. You can buy special glasses. You could tell. You know, the Arizal could look at you and see what you did. For those who are able to tell, you put on those glasses. And you see the guy never did a sin, but the Chidah says, "V'saliso Israelis." Where did I get this from? I saw it in the Yaros Tavash, which means the only source for the Hesped that the Arizal gave on the Ramak is Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. Even the Chidah who quotes it, he tells us where he got it from. He got it from the Yaros Tavash. Okay, so and Rabbi Pershal, if I'm saying it correctly, he writes Nachal Kidumim was published in 1795 to 1797 in Livorno. And the Chidah himself says in the Dvarim Achadim, which was published in 1788, says he got it from the Yaros Tavash. So again, I'm not here to give a history share today. I'm here to discuss a different point, a hashkafa. But we might get into the history a little bit. So far so good.
Later, was he again the Chidah?
Chidah was about 200 years later. After the Hesped of the
after the Yaros Tavash.
No, 40 years. 40, 50 years.
He lived.
He died.
He was alive.
No, excuse me. He was alive at the same. The Sefer, the Chidah lived from 1724 to 1806. So the Chidah saw Rabbi Yonasan. or he heard about him. He heard about him. However, the Nachal Kidumim was published in 1795. Here's the most juicy part of this shiur, and maybe any shiur we said this year. There was a great rabbi living in Sfas. His name was Rav Mordechai HaKohen. Rav Mordechai HaKohen was called one of the Gurei Arizal. One of the Ari is the great lion, and the Gurei Ari are the lion cubs, because they are like the students of the Ari. He had a Rabbi, Rav Yisrael di Koriel. Rav Yisrael di Koriel was a Talmud of the Arizal. And his student was Rav Mordechai HaKohen. Amazingly, Rav Mordechai HaKohen, one of the great Rabbanim in Tzfas, had to leave Tzfas and take up a Rabbanos in Aleppo in Syria. Why? He didn't have Parnasa. He wrote a classic Sefer on Chumash called Shach al HaTorah. I'm sure many of you may have heard of the Sefer Shach al HaTorah, not to be confused with the Shach on Yoredeya. It's a little bit of a Kabbalistic work. It's like quasi Parsha, quasi Pshat, quasi Kabbalah. Shach al HaTorah. Rav Mordechai HaKohen. Shach al HaTorah. It's a good set to have. 2 volumes. Shach al HaTorah. And he says Pshat in this pasuk, the exact opposite of what the Ramah supposedly said, and the exact opposite of what the Arizal supposedly said about the Ramak. Not only does he say the opposite, but as we're going to see, he holds that the Pshat that's being attributed to the Arizal and the Ramah, that the Yaris Davash and the Chidah says, it's wrong. Not only is it wrong, it's a Navala. And let's read the words. Look at number 11. You're going to see a guy who seems to be missing a reason to die. Don't let it entertain in your mind to say, don't entertain the idea this guy is perfect. The only reason he died is because he's a descendant of Adam HaRishon. No, you want to say like this. You see a guy, you think he's missing a reason to die, and he dies. You want to blame it on the Eitz Hadas. Don't hinge this nivola on the sin of the Eitz Hadas. This is disgusting, it's despicable. This hashkafa is a navala to say the Rebbeinu Shalom took away somebody that never did a sin only because of the sin of the Eitz Hadas. That means the Rebbeinu Shalom did din beloy din. He conducted judgment without reason. You're speaking Lashon Hara about the Rebbeinu Shalom. Better to say the guy did a sin than to speak badly about God. To me, this reminds me of when Rabbi Victor Miller used to speak about the events of 1939 to 1945. And he obviously a very sensitive subject. And people used to say, how could you say reasons? You're speaking badly about the Kedoshim. And he would say, and then what? Speak Lashon Hara about the Rebbeinu Shalom? So this was an interesting debate. To me, this is the exact same thing.
Before that didn't have any sins died.
What?
Before that died without any sins.
So the Gemara says they died without sin, but for us also, apparently because of Adam HaRishon.
Okay,
so you mean that's a kash on him? That's a kash. You mean you're saying we know there is such a phenomenon? Okay, good point.
So you have over here, you have the Arizal, you have the Yaris Davash, you have the Chidah, and along comes this gentleman, and he says, I disagree with all 3 of them.
Well, he doesn't quote them. He may not have known they said that.
Rob knows what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, we're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss. Now listen to this. So listen how he reads it. The guy is missing a reason to die. V'humas, and he dies. V'solisa, says, you want to blame it on the Eitz Hadas. Don't hinge this nevala on the tree. What should you do with such a thought? Can it. Ki kavar sikbareno. Bury it. Don't let it enter your mind. Don't let it enter your thoughts. Vayemahu. It's disgusting. It's the disparagement of Hashem. Don't defile your body. Your body is called Adama because your body comes from the Adama. This is a defilement of the soul, a defilement of the guf. You're not allowed to think that. So in other words, that which the Or Chadash said, the Ramah said on Rav Shalom Shachna, and that which the Yarech HaYisanim said, the Ramah said Pshat, and that which Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz says, the Arizal says, and that which the Chidah says, the Arizal says, the Shach says, not only is it wrong, it's disgusting, it's a Navala, heaven forbid to ever say such a thing.
Exactly what I said.
So to me, now there are two ways of taking this. The Reb Pershal is studying this from a historic perspective, which is not that interesting, which is not that important to me right now. It's interesting, it's important, but I'm not here to give a history shiur. But I do want to discuss the history. But to me, what's much more important than the history is which hashkafa is correct. If somebody sees a great tzaddik passing on, should one say, look, they're sin-free, and why'd they die? Because of the sin of the Eitzadas. Is that a Navala? Is what was attributed to these great Gedolim, the Ramah and the Ari, is that wrong? Or is it a valid hashkafa? In other words, would we go like the Shach HaTorah, or would we go like what Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz is attributing to Arizal? Now, in general, you always have machlokes sin in hashkafa. There's, one of the most important signs of maturity in learning is recognize that almost everything is a matter of different opinions. It's not shver that there's a machlokes, but to me, it's somewhat bothersome to have such a wide machlokes. Especially, the Shach HaTorah is arguing on what Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz attributed to the Ari. So as we're going to see, Rabbi Pershal feels that it must be that the Ramah never gave this Hesped, and the Ari didn't say the Hesped. And as we're going to see, this Hesped was perhaps given by some other Gadol. And over the time, some of the facts got a little bit switched. So for example, as follows. The Shla, look at number 13, the Shla Masechta Tainis, the Shla says straight up this pshat. Number 13. V'chiyeh be'ish chet mishpat maves, v'humas, v'salisa isayalitz. And the Shla quotes the Zohar, who says exactly, if a man will be missing a reason to die, and he dies, blame it on the Eitzadas, and the Shla quotes Tikkunei Zohar. Now I try to look it up. I saw what the Shla is referring to in the Tikkunei Zohar. You can look it up. It's in Tikkun Chamishi, Tinyana. It's very hard to read that the Zohar is actually referring to this. But let's learn what Rabbi Pershal says, and then let's try to study it from a different perspective. Right?
I mean, you could take a pasuk and to turn it around a little bit. The Kotzka does it all the way.
Yeah. No, the question.
Instead of an answer, this is not a story. This is trying to say something
No.
out of the Pashup Shad of the pasuk. Why he doesn't believe that you have to that Lois Sodom means.
No, of course. I'm not questioning. Anyone is allowed to say a drush. But, no, that's not the question. The question is, but the hashkafa behind the drush, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz feels it's a valid hashkafa, that if somebody dies, you could say they don't have any sin, they died because of sin of Adam Rishon. But the Shach HaTorah says that hashkafa is a navala, you're not allowed to say that. So how do you have such a wide machlokes? Some say that Arizal says you're allowed to say that. In fact, Arizal said it about the Ramak. So in other words, what Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz says that Arizal said about the Ramak, the Shach HaTorah calls it a navala. So how do you have something that one of the great all-time Gedolim, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, says that Arizal said, and a student of the Ari called that notion a navala? How's that possible?
Who says this over there in number 12? Aval yeshloch b'haman she'ein misa v'lo echet.
That's a quote from the Shach HaTorah.
Shach HaTorah.
Yeah.
So, but he's going against more than that, because we have. It's a known fact. So that's what Reb Chaim was asking also. In other words, what will the Shach HaTorah say about the phenomenon that 4 people died without sin? Right.
So I believe he would say, those 4 people died without sin. They were people in the Chumash, they were people back in the times of Tanakh, Binyamin, Yishai, but to say about someone in our times, or even 500 years ago, that we're not authorized to do. We know Ein Tzadik Ba'aretz Asher Yaseh Tov V'lo Yachta. Okay, so Rav Pershal's conclusion is as follows. He says he is highly suspicious that the Arizal ever gave this Hesped, or that the Ramah ever gave the Hesped. Regarding the Ramah, he says it can't be. We know the Shla was a student of Rav Shalom Shachna. The Shla's father was a student of the Ramah. You don't think the Shla growing up would have heard the Hesped that the Ramah gave on Rav Shalom Shachna? That he would have to quote a Tikunei Zayar? Why wouldn't he say this is the Hesped the Ramah gave on Rav Shalom Shachna? I personally don't really hear that argument. The Shla is a classic sefer. He's not going to bring. Why would he have to bring a raya from a story? It's a much better raya to quote the Zayar, who says beferish. This is Pshat in the pasuk. So I'm not so compelled by that question. Regarding the Arizal, he says, how could it be that the Shachal Torah Mordechai HaKohen, who is a student of Rabbi Yisrael Di Coriel, who is a student of Al-Ari, would have said that this idea is an avala? Wouldn't he have known from his Rebbe that the Arizal gave this Hesped? He lived in Sfas. I mean, if you're living in Sfas in the times of the Arizal, you're going to know what the Arizal said at the Ramak's Levaya. So therefore, he sort of dismisses the fact that the Ari really gave this Hesped, or that the Ramah really gave this Hesped, and he suggests as follows. A couple years ago in the summer, I was in Italy. I was actually there twice. And we went to the kever of Rav Meir Katzenellenbogen, Maharam Padua. And he had a son. Now, Rav Meir Katzenellenbogen was from Poland. He was a grandson of Mahari Mintz. He had a son called Shik. Who is Shik? Shmuel Yehuda Katzenellenbogen. Okay? His father was Maharam Padua, and he was an Italian rabbi, one of the Gdolei Hadar, who gave the Hesped for Shmuel Yehuda Katzenellenbogen, none other than Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh of Modena. We once spoke about him in the past years ago. And he, no connection, relation, affiliation, or any association at all with Maram Shik. That's just his name, Shmuel Yehuda Katzenellenbogen. Maram Shik got his last name because when they instituted last names, he chose Shik, Shem Yisrael Kodesh. That's where that Shik came from. Yeah. So the Reb Shmuel Yehuda Katzenellenbogen gave a Hesped for Reb Zalman Katz of Manitoba. And he said, this man was such a tzaddik. There was no chassid like this Reb Zalman Katz. We know the word ish is a name of chashivas. Kulam anoshim. Kiyah be'ish. You're going to see a very chashiv person. Chet, he's going to be missing. Mishpat maves, a reason to die. So why did he die? One of two reasons. Either vihumas, other people killed him. Because we know there's a concept that Hashem sometimes brings kapara to the whole dar through a tzaddik. So he reads the pasuk, vihumas, he was killed because of others. The Hashem visited the sins of others upon this tzaddik, vihumas. Or the salisa oisayalates, or hinge it on the sin of the Yetz Hadas. Because, says Reb Shmuel Yehuda Katzenellenbogen, although there's no tzaddik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov v'lo yachta, there's no righteous person that never sinned, but this man does not have a reason to die, so why did he die? One of two reasons, either v'humas, either because of the sins of others, or because of the sin of the Yetz Hadas. Now Shmuel Yehuda Katzenellenbogen lived from 1521 to 1597. He lived in the times of the Ramah and the Arizal. He printed this Hesped. This sefer was first printed in the year 1594, and it was not printed again for 200 years. So what Reb Pershal suggests is Arizal never said this Hesped. We have no evidence Arizal said this Hesped. The Ramah never said this Hesped. We have no evidence the Ramah ever said the Hesped. We know Reb Shmuel Yehuda Katzenellenbogen gave the Hesped, but then his sefer went out of print for 200 years. And it could be that as the story was sort of passed over, some of the names got. Now, I'm not going to comment on that. It's hard to prove such a thing. I'm not sure if we need to say such a thing. Maybe until Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, it was well known this is what the Arizal said or what the Ramak said, and nobody recorded it. Maybe people didn't record stories. I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that, but I'm here to comment on the following issue. How in the world is it possible that a hashkafa that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz feels is sound, because he says that Arizal said it, that the Chidah says is valid, because he says that the Arizal said it, that the Or Chadash says, the Ramah held of, the Shach holds is a Navala. I mean, isn't that, that's such a wide machlokas, that some say it's correct, it's so correct that Arizal himself said it, and some say it's a falsha hashkafa, it's a disgusting hashkafa. That's pretty wide. So good. So we want to try to reconcile. Is there any way to reconcile the opinion of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz and Chidah that it's so correct that Ari and the Ramah said it, with the Shach who says it's a Navala? So I have one of three answers. They're all posit, they're all theory, but we'll see what you think. The first one is what Rabbi Yossi says. There's a Taz in Yeridea that says, at a Hesped, are you allowed to exaggerate at a Hesped? Let's say a guy, he davened with the minyan 5.5 days a week. Are you allowed to say he davened at a minyan every day of the week? Are you allowed to exaggerate at a Hesped? The Taz says you're allowed to exaggerate a little bit. A little bit you could exaggerate. Because everybody is a little bit better. There are different ways of understanding it. The words of the Taz are because everybody would have done a little bit better if they could have, or if they had the ability. That's the Taz. You could exaggerate a little bit. So could we suggest as follows? Avada at the Hesped of the Ramak, or at the Hesped of Rav Shalom Shachna. Is there anybody who never committed a sin? No, Ein Tzadik Bartza Sheyasa Tov Layechta. But there are some people who are pretty close. So at the time of a Hesped, you're given license to exaggerate a bissel. So the Arizal got up at Hesped, he said, the Ramak, there's no reason why he had to go. We can't explain it. It must have been because of the Chet of the Yitz Hadas. And Rav Shalom Shachna the Ramah said, we can't understand. It must have been because of the Chet of the Yitz Hadas. But are you really allowed to think that? No. It's wrong. Not only is it wrong, it's a Navala. Because then you're saying the Rebbeinu Shalom conducted din, a mishpah without din. So there's no machloikis over here. Kan bizmana hesped, you're allowed to say you have a certain license at a time of a hesped. But to say that that's the pshat in the pasuk, you're not allowed to do that. I'm not fully satisfied with this because the Shla says this is pshat in the pasuk, and the Shla is not talking about a hesped. He's just teaching pshat in the pasuk that if you see a person missing a reason to die and he dies, hinge it on the Yetz Hadas. And the Yerach HaIsanim says the Ramah Stam said this pshat. He didn't say it at a hesped. Here's another possible pshat, and that is: are you allowed to say if somebody passes on, they never sinned? Why'd they die? Because of the sin of the Yetz Hadas. You're not allowed to say that. It's disgusting. It's a Navala. How could you say that about the Rebbeinu Shalom, that he did something for no reason? Ein misa b'lei chet. However, if you're an Arizal and you're saying it about a Ramak, you could say it. You can't say it about anybody. You have to be an Arizal, and the subject and the person who you're speaking about has to be a Ramak. Otherwise, you have no right to say such a thing. Just to say about anybody, or even any tzaddik, or any Talmid Chacham, you have to be of a certain caliber. You have to be a Ramah saying about Rav Shalom Shachna. You have to be an Arizal saying about a Ramak. Again, this doesn't really answer for the Shla, because the Shla just says this is pshat in the pasuk, and the Yerach HaIsanim says this is pshat in the pasuk. So my best attempt is as follows, and I think it might be true. If you look at carefully, number 15, at the Hesped, Reb Shmuel Yehuda Katzenellenbogen gave for this for this great Rav Zalman Katz. He says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the 7th line. You see a guy who's missing a reason to die. Now, when we say he's missing a reason to die, it doesn't mean he never sinned. Because there's nobody who doesn't sin. Only those 4 people in the Gemara never sinned. Remember, you asked before, what do you mean? Can you deny the fact that the Gemara says 4 people died without sin? That's right. They die without sin, but there's no one else who has no sin. But still, says Shmuel Yehuda Katz, of course everybody is going to sin. Not everybody is going to have kavanah for every word of davening. Probably sometime in one's life, somebody may slip up somewhere. But the person is missing a reason to die. They never committed a sin that they should be chayiv misa. That's what I don't understand, says Shmuel Yehuda Katz and Olam Bogan. I'm not saying this great Rav never sinned. Avada, everybody sins. Ein sadik baratza sheyasa tov layachta. What I'm saying is he's missing a reason to die. So perhaps this could reconcile the Shachal HaTorah with Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz and the Chidah. To say about someone, I don't understand why they died. They never ever committed any sin. Why did God do this? That's an avala. You don't have to say somebody never sinned. Ein sadik baratza sheyasa tov layachta. And if the person sinned, then Hashem punished. But what you're allowed to say, and what the Arizal said, and what the Ramak said, was Rav Shalom Shachna and the Ramak, they never committed a sin that would explain why they had to die. So perhaps this is a way to reconcile what the Ari said according to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz and the Chidah, and what the Ramak said according to the Archadash, and that's what they said was that the Ramak or Rav Shalom Shachna, they never sinned a sin which is mishpat maves. They're chait mishpat maves. They're missing a reason to die. But what the Shach perhaps is saying, which is an avala, and you're now to take it into your mind, and you need to bury it, is to say, oh, this person is perfect. We don't understand why anything happened to them. Perhaps that is an avala. Okay, Marav Rabbi, I'll let you think about it. Laya marti kiblu daiti, but this is quite an interesting pasuk, and here you have an interpretation of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz and the Chidah who attribute it to the Ari, and the Archadash attributes it to the Ramah, that they said it at the Hesped of the greatest all-time people, and the Shachal HaTorah says this is not the hashkafa that we accept. But again, Torah is kipatish yifutzat sela. There's so many different ways to understand it, and so many different streams. So the Rebbe Shem should be Meir Einenu B'Sayrasecha, and everyone should have Bracha B'Atzlacha Shkayach. Yes.
Can we be punished for the sins of our fathers?
No, but other Marishan is different. Anybody want to daven? Anybody not daven Marav? Do we have 6 who didn't daven?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.